Welcome to today's Catholic Daily Readings from Christus Dominus Bread of Life. A reading from the first book of Kings. And it happened in that time that Jeroboam departed from Jerusalem, and the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, wearing a new cloak, found him on the way, and the two were alone in the field. And taking his new cloak with which he was covered, Ahijah tore it into 12 parts, and he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I will tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give to you 10 tribes. Yet one tribe shall remain with him, for the sake of my servant David, as well as Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel." And Israel drew away from the house of David, even to the present day.
There shall be no strange God among you, no foreign fire in your hands. I am the Lord who brought you out, who carried you through the sands. I filled your mouth with promise, fed you from the stone. I called you mine in mercy, but you chose your own. I am the Lord, your God. Hear my voice. I am the Lord, your God. Make your choice before the silence seals your fate. Hear my voice. But my people would not listen. Israel would not obey. They turned their ears to idols and slowly walked away. So I gave you to your counsels. I let you keep your pride. I watched you chase the shadows that could never satisfy. I am the Lord, your God. Hear my voice. I am the Lord, your God. Make your choice. You shut the door I held open wide. Hear my If only you would hear me, if only you would turn, I would humble every enemy, I would make your dry ground burn with honey. But you would not. I am the Lord, your God. Hear my voice. I am the Lord, My people, hear my voice.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. And again, departing from the borders of Tyre, he went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, through the midst of the area of the 10 cities. And they brought someone who was deaf and mute to him, and they begged him so that he would lay his hand upon him. And taking him away from the crowd, he put his fingers into his ears, and spitting, he touched his tongue. And gazing up to heaven, he groaned and said to him, Ephphatha, which is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was released, and he spoke correctly. And he instructed them not to tell anyone, but as much as he instructed them, so much more did they preach about it, and so much more did they wonder, saying, He has done all things well. He has caused both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. Join us for today's reflection. A new cloak torn into 12 pieces on a dusty road outside Jerusalem. A sigh from the throat of God made flesh on a hillside in Gentile territory. Between these two moments stretches the entire human tragedy of refusing to hear and the divine determination to open what has been closed. The prophet Ahijah waited for Jeroboam on that lonely road with a deliberate theatrical gesture that would have stopped any traveler cold. He took his brand new garment, something valuable and unblemished, and ripped it apart into 12 pieces, handing 10 to this ambitious young administrator who had caught Solomon's eye as a capable manager of forced labor. The symbolism was unmistakable. God was about to tear apart the united kingdom that David had built and Solomon had expanded, and the reason echoed what we heard yesterday. Solomon's heart had turned to foreign gods, but notice what gets easily missed in this dramatic scene. The kingdom was being torn because Israel would not listen. The psalm response today cuts to the heart of the matter. I am the Lord your God, hear my voice. And yet the psalm immediately laments, my people heard not my voice, Israel obeyed me not. So I gave them up to the hardness of their hearts, they walked according to their own counsels. There it is, the divine heartbreak. God had promised to fill their mouths if they would only open them to receive what he wanted to give. Instead, they stopped their ears and God, in the most devastating judgment imaginable, simply let them have what they wanted, themselves. This is the context that makes the gospel scene so stunning. Jesus has been traveling through Gentile territory, from Tyre through Sidon, now arriving in the region of the Decapolis, a federation of 10 Greek cities that were centers of pagan Hellenistic culture. These were the outsiders, the very people Israel was supposed to remain separate from, the nations whose gods had seduced Solomon's heart. And here, among these pagans, people bring Jesus a man who cannot hear and can barely speak. Watch what Jesus does. He takes the man aside, away from the crowd. This healing would be intimate, personal, unhurried. He puts his fingers into the man's ears, the very organs that have failed him. He touches his tongue with saliva, and then Mark records one of the most extraordinary details in all the Gospels. Jesus looked up to heaven and sighed. The Greek word suggests something like a groan, the kind of sound you make when grief wells up from somewhere too deep for words. This was not theatrical like Ahijah's cloak tearing. This was something far more personal, a sigh from the heart of God who had spent centuries pleading with a people who would not listen. Then he speaks that Aramaic word that Mark preserves for us, Ephphatha, which means be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. The crowds responded with astonishment. He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. Those words should ring bells. Isaiah had prophesied that when God came to save his people, the ears of the deaf will be unstopped, and the tongue of the mute will sing for joy. The Gentile crowds in Decapolis were unknowingly identifying Jesus as the fulfillment of messianic prophecy, recognizing what Israel's own leaders would refuse to see. Here is the reversal that runs through these readings. Israel, who had been given the law, the prophets, the covenant, the temple, had stopped their ears against God's voice until he gave them over to their hardness. The kingdom was torn because they would not hear. Meanwhile, in pagan territory, among people who had never received the advantages Israel enjoyed, a man's ears are opened, and he immediately uses his released tongue to speak plainly, to proclaim what God had done. The question these readings pose is uncomfortable. Which character are you in these stories? Are you Solomon's Israel, so surrounded by spiritual privilege that you have grown deaf to the very voice that once thrilled you? Or are you the nameless man in Decapolis, brought by others to Jesus, waiting for the touch that will finally open what has been closed? The psalm offers a haunting, if only from the mouth of God. If only my people would hear me, and Israel walk in my ways, I would feed them with the finest wheat and satisfy them with honey from the rock. God is not stingy with his blessings. He wants to give abundantly, but we must be willing to hear, and hearing requires the kind of openness that proud, self-sufficient hearts find almost impossible to maintain. Perhaps we need to pray what that deaf man could not. Lord, put your fingers in my ears, touch my tongue. Sigh over me with that holy grief that longs to restore what sin has broken, and speak that word over every closed and hardened place in my soul, Ephatha.